you very much for accepting our invitation to share your knowledge on, well, let's keep it that big umbrella, cultural policies. If you would like, we can start with your initiative, your project, well, your program mainly, Culture Policy Room. And then maybe we can go back on your previous experience and how maybe you can tell us how you build up to this point. Yeah, just tell us a bit about the cultural policy room, and then maybe I pop up with a question about the gap between research and advocacy itself. But yeah, please.
Hi, Oana. Good morning again. A Culture Policy Room, it's an initiative which is now a little bit older than 1 year, so it's still quite a young initiative. We call it a think tank. So basically, the idea is to provide some kind of thought leadership in the field of cultural policy in a bit holistic, let's say, helicopter view, not based or focused on specific country or only at the EU level, but kind of seeing the trends which are happening all across Europe and also beyond. So we are currently mostly trying to identify the topics of interest and feel that gap, what is not discussed, what is not looked at, what is not being investigated. We also have a newsletter where we try to put everything, as I call it, in a very simple way. When people ask me, why do I have to read your newsletter? I always say, this is everything what you need to know at this point on cultural policy. And we also explain why you need to know that. So, but then maybe you can also immediately say why we started that with two colleagues. I think all the three of us, I will especially speak for myself, worked previously in different contexts. So in networks, in research structures, we did some consultancy. I also did consultancy for UNESCO. I worked at IFACA, at IETM. So these are transnational networks, transnational federations. And I always felt that I need or miss some kind of a platform or space where there would be independent ideas created, so which are not having any specific agenda. There's not advocacy for a specific sector, or it is not necessarily promoted by public funded bodies. So just a space which would help us to have honest conversations and honest exchange about what works, what doesn't work in cultural policy. And also something that was important to me back then, to work in a non-programmed way. So even if we are always in any job want to plan things, and this is important, especially if you are funded by, for example, governments or by the EU, you have to know what will happen within a year, within 2 years, etc. But the space of cultural policy is unpredictable, just like politics in general. There are topics which pop up, which we want to dig into, but this is not within the plan. So, and it always happens, let's say, on the lab. I will just give you an example. There was this regulation of European Parliament about working conditions, the status of the artist. And there were a lot of new ideas in that regulation, which some of us were like intrigued by, some others were worried about. For example, social conditionality of public funding. So the public funder beneficiaries need to comply with fair pay, etc. So this topic, I thought like it would be great to have like few weeks time and dig into that and understand how that is actually work. Are there any examples at the national level, regional level, and to see can that work or not? So anytime when there is some kind of idea coming either from policymakers or from advocates, I think we're lacking the actual impartial knowledge just to say immediately how this can work, what could be the underwater stones, or how do you say it? So this is the gap, exactly the gap that I think we also feature that on our website that we wanted to fill.
Yeah, interesting points about being actually limited in time, but it also in content about different types of funding. And you are very right, because when you write an application, you have to to put everything forward, and then you cannot actually move quite a lot on the left side or on the right side. But interestingly enough, maybe we always have this part of a technical approach in our knowledge transfer interviews, but also on our projects. And you mentioned something very interesting, that you keep this the organization like a space where you can be also spontaneous, for example, in your research, which sounds a bit unexpected, but actually this happens quite a lot in our professional lives. So how would you deal from a professional point of view, because you also deal in our project with creative professions and jobs. So actually, you also do this voluntary research on topics that you are interested in, like a study, like a research, but you are also working within different projects, but also you can also work commissioned by different organizations or networks. So how would you put your research as an interest, like a professional interest, the commissioned work? How would you move around these types of work?
I think it's a matter of balancing and always having, I think any think tank, let's say also think tanks which actually have stable, structured, or project-based funding. The idea is that you have some kind of recurring projects, maybe some studies that you publish every year to see the trends, etc. But there is also this space for more specific policy briefings or some kind of analysis pieces, or like the media works as well. So you just basically keep that space for it's not spontaneous, but it's basically you always know how much time certain thing will take you, but you may not know the topic in advance. So let's say it's a balance. Of course, there are projects, and all three of us, and we work with other organizations. So I also do a lot of other projects which are not part of Culture Policy Room. Some of them directly feed into the work of Culture Policy Room. So it's a matter of putting this puzzle together. But I think that the idea of think tank, which is, I think, really important in our sector, it is exactly that format of working, that you allocate some space, some time for digging into important matters and to important topics which emerge as we go, and not something that you program in advance.
Yeah, this was a bit of a side question, and thank you for your input. You mentioned the status of the artist is also as a subject, a theme, not a concept, that we have been approaching in our project the last years as well. Can you tell us a bit about how would you work with the subject? Because if you are an artist, you have a certain approach. If you are a cultural operator, a certain approach. A researcher, policy officer, and so on and so forth. So how have you approached this subject, and what kind of input and output, of course, you had on this matter? Maybe why not quite a status of the concept of the theme itself at the European level, which is very, very interesting.
This topic has gained quite a momentum, let's say, in the last 5 years, which was triggered by the pandemic. We knew for a long time that artistic work is precarious and that pay in the art sector is very low. But I think only during and shortly after the pandemic, it has become clear that we also can face real talent drains in the sector if a crisis like this happens. And people could really reconsider their career paths and leave the sector, basically. So this became very existential, both for artists, but also for policymakers. They understood that this whole system can fall apart. That's why it became very popular. At the EU level, this discussion also started, I think, more or less. At that time, there were some attempts to discuss status of the artist, like really long time ago. Parliament had some kind of document published about it, but it wasn't picked up. So between 2020 and 2023, I think there were like three main documents the parliament published about it, with the last one being accepted and also responded officially by the Commission in 2023, which actually asked for some kind of consolidated EU action on that topic, on working conditions, on status. But of course, it's a very complicated topic because EU does not have competency in many fields. So we talk here about taxation, social security. It's about public funding. It's about um, training for artists, education. So status of the artist had a very um, complex nature. So I think what is really important at this point is that kind of to track and measure the progress that has been done at the member state level to really see what happened, because in fact there are many different measures that already exist. Spain, Portugal adopted not that long time ago some kind of laws on status of the artist. I know that in Romania there was also a new law about cultural professional. There's basic income for artists scheme in Ireland. There is a new reform that took place in Belgium. So there are different ways of looking at it. Sometimes status of the artist is all about to see how can we basically fill the gaps which exist in artistic professional situations, like their access to social security or irregular incomes, that they cannot have unemployment easily like everyone else. So some frameworks focus on gaps, some others inverse on the contrary, like focus on how can we reward artists. So in order to apply for that kind of status, you actually need to make certain success. You actually need to make certain amount of money per year. So there are different ways of looking at it. I think it really depends on the historical social contract existing in a specific country. How do we look at artists? Are artists basically the achievers, or are artists rather the struggling, let's say, individuals which create important work but are forever precarious? So it's a difficult and complex topic. I think that what is clear is that a reform, or like, because there are also countries in which you just have different measures, which there is no status of the artist, but there are different measures which help artists to, for example, have some taxation regime, to have access to certain social securities through that fund. But then there is another fund which is regulated by something else, where they can get like some education support, like. So what proves to be really effective is to bring all these things together within one law. So that's on one hand. And another thing which is really important is that how do you define the artist? And of course, we know that these days all these definitions become ever more blurry. And I must say, from my knowledge, from my research, I know that overwhelming majority of EU countries define artists in a more inclusive way than just to focusing on creators. But it's also important to embrace as many disciplines, relevant disciplines as possible. So it needs to be inclusive, and it needs to be consolidated, and it needs to be easily accessible for people. Because what also often exists is that the system is so complex that artists don't want to, let's say, engage with it, or don't know how to engage with it, and then they cannot really benefit from it. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting point. Apropo pandemic, and yes, in Romania, maybe other countries as well, they were just wondering in the first year of pandemics, okay, artists, but who are the artists? Where are the artists? And it was this amazing question: how do you track them? I mean, I don't know. We all pay taxes through our contracts. We all have different types of entities that you can follow up. So actually, it was this fog that nobody knew how to approach it. And apropos what you said, actually, it was in our PNR, so that I say it in Romania, so that our Romanian colleagues know what we mean. Those national plans made especially for pandemic recovery, and it was there mentioned that we should have a law concerning the cultural workers. So actually, as you mentioned, apropos inclusive definition, it was this type of approach. Yet is not really operational in Romania. There is also a registry where you have to go. You don't know exactly how a contract can look like, etc. But actually, it's good that we have it. But returning to European Union and to your knowledge, so actually, what can European Union do? Sorry for the blunt type of putting the question in terms of actually framing this. So because as you mentioned, it's also about education. It's about a certain type of industry, and then it's about a certain type of employment. The duration is also the type of employment is also very specific. And if you include artists and cultural workers, then you are almost done because you don't know exactly how to approach it. So actually, what can European Union do in terms of types of documents that can put out, and how can member states operate with that framework? So be it a directive, a recommendation, how would you think it should look like, or how you found it for the time being? How did you find it to be operational in one way or another?
Okay, again, EU has a limited capacity in this field, so we cannot think about EU law which would solve all problems and force everyone to follow a certain direction within member states. Another thing is also very important to keep in mind is that laws also, funny enough, don't always work. So it is a topic, especially when it comes to fair pay. There is always this minimum amount or minimum standards. So we always talk about some kind of things which are not very concrete. So it's typically recommended. So we recommend you have to comply with that. But then if you don't comply, there's no actual mechanism to check. So to say what is really needed is a promotion of things. Yes, it sounds a little bit maybe intangible, but like, you know, in many countries in Europe, you have parental leave for fathers. How many fathers do actually take this leave? So it goes back to the culture that exists within the society in a specific country, who takes care of the children. And the same happens with fair pay or treating artists as workers, treating artists as labor, etc., which also is very important. Kind of how do artists themselves answer these questions? So fair pay, it is not just that somebody has to drop it from the sky, because there will always be problems with budgets. And this comes as well for other schemes like social security or anything else, because like to help artists actually, or to help any specific profession, there is a need for specific budget. So how to make sure that in these times of history, when we constantly have this austerity looming, there are other priorities coming up. How can we make sure that these nice initiatives don't just remain at the level of pilots, or these laws remain on the level of kind of very vague recommendations, or some spaces within which organizations and people can choose how they do it, etc. So I think there is what EU actually can do is to keep this debate open, to keep this debate going, and to persistently find good practices that exist at the member states to stimulate this exchange, and to make sure that there is a structured way of actually tracking progress at the national level. So I know there is now a discussion about to have a specific charter for working conditions at the EU level. Even if that sounds quite symbolic, or maybe like a bit of a commitment on a discursive level, I think if there is some kind of monitoring system attached, if that's possible, or some kind of follow-up mechanism is created, I think it could stimulate, trigger progress at the member states level. So what I'm trying to say is that, of course, hard measures like laws, regulations, legislative acts, etc., like they're very important and they can be adopted at national levels. But what is also necessary is a constant promotion and a constant awareness raising about all these topics, and also within the art sector itself. So sometimes you don't know where it actually starts, because if funders create, I don't know, raise budgets without necessarily saying that these budgets should go to bigger salaries, how much certainty do we have that these raised budgets will not be just used for more projects, for more visibility, or for more production, instead of for just doing the same but paying people better? So if that recommendation actually would exist, like, okay, this money is created specifically for augmenting salaries, how can we make sure that this is going to be accepted within society? So this will come together. Maybe the media campaign is needed so that people actually understand the hardship of artistic work. Then when we go back to institutions which actually have to pay these salaries, how to keep them ready for the reality that if these budgets will shrink in the future, they will not go back to reducing salaries. So how to make sure that this topic is there and it's this understanding, this awareness is actually strong, is robust, so that people actually follow these steps and don't go back. Like an example is in Berlin, there was a fund created for fair pay, and now there are the big cuts. And so this nice fund was scrapped together with some other programs. So what do you do then if people have gotten used already to a certain level of pay? Do you reduce your production? Do you reduce your staff? Do you just go back to how it was, I don't know, 10 years ago and expect people work for free? So I think when we think about this topic, fair pay, we have always to think about rethink the whole system, how we work, because budgets are shrinking, evolving, money are being moved from infrastructural projects to, I don't know, big events, then back to contemporary art. Like things can change, and it needs to be stable approach to this topic.
Yeah, like an observation, not necessarily a question, because you also mentioned the shift that, well, the awareness shift that that happened due to the pandemics is this approach that when you use, for example, precarious, you use this type of, let's help artists. So actually, they kind of put loads of sectors in a vulnerable position that actually you cannot do it by yourself. You need the state to help you. So actually this idea of help, this position that you have to give, you as a state have to give me money because I'm great. So this type of discourse actually really hurted and still hurts in some countries, but also in Romania, because it's unclear. For example, apropos the definition of artist, what do you say about the definition of culture? Oh my God, what's culture? So actually, it's this idea of what should state fund. What should state fund directly his institutions? What should the state do with the money that opens to non-profit organization or individual or artist directly as person, not as legal entities? And then why only non-profit organization? Why not small enterprise, which is, I don't know, a startup, a creative startup, and so on and so forth. So actually, it's all this mix that also adds to the issue. What does it mean to support a sector or the other? So apropos recommendation and charts, and who would who would actually be fitted in that chart? Who are you? Are you a cultural worker? How do you operate? So yeah, just an observation. And if you want, I would like to a bit not to jump, but maybe you would like to mention your research, State of Culture, because you work also with a network where we met actually with the Culture Action Europe. And maybe apropos the beginning of our discussion, apropos research, how maybe you just tell for our listener a bit about the report, but also if you can tell us a bit how you approached research. So, I mean, how would you try to show what? Because it's so many domains and so many points where you can start talking about culture. Yeah, please, please.
For me, culture is cultural sector, so I'm not so confused actually about what means culture. I think, and I know your question wasn't about definition of culture, but it's an important question, in fact, because I think often when we try to promote culture in other agendas, we ourselves use arguments which are nothing to do with the cultural sector or something to do, but like just as much as education is, for example, we say, I don't know, sustainable development, I don't know, is cultural because it's all about values and it's all about behaviors and it's all about our patterns of, I don't know, treating our surrounding. But this is not just art that creates these values. So it's all about it connects to so many other things. It's the school, it is the economic system, it is a TV, I don't know, and many other things. So it's not just artists who are irresponsible for our values, traditions, etc. So whenever it's reduced to that definition of culture, I think we are not giving ourselves a favor. We are just watering down the whole debate. So for me, culture is a system of artworks, processes, cultural products, cultural organizations, people. Like now, I'm not giving you kind of a very professional definition, but this is for me is confined within the field of professional field of people who create culture, who create art, actually, who manage it, who take care of it, who mediate it, bring it to people, etc. So I wouldn't mix culture with too many things. And for the state of culture, how do I choose what to focus on? How did I choose? It was already a while ago. So the state of culture was published at the end of 2024. So now we are 1 year. This report is now already 1 year old. For me, I spoke to the cultural sector. So there are some members within Culture Action Europe who kind of represent specific sectors. So I try to speak with a person representing art education, performing arts, music, heritage, audiovisual industry. So, and then I ask them a very simple question: what would be the three main concerns or challenges for your sector in the next from 3 to 5 years? And then I saw the signals, like the tendencies. And so these were for me the chapters, basically. Then we also had a survey in which we asked some more specific questions. Also, and there was a lot of open fields where people could just comment on the survey itself. And that's how I understood that the sector is quite, sorry for the word, fed up with instrumentalization of culture. And that's why the first and biggest chapter of this report was all about this instrumentalization, which is quite an old topic. I think it's quite old school to go back to kind of balancing art for art's sake versus instrumentalization. So I was very much aware of that when putting this as a central element of the report. I think that many people in the sector have moved on quite quite far in actually thinking artists are obliged to be useful for society, for economics. It's not the same time anymore as it was, I don't know, 60s of last year. So we have to be kind of talking about the value of our work on all kind of different terms. But still, I think since it's not resolved, even if it's an old topic, it's a still burning topic. So it was put there. So this is a bit how the main chapters emerged. And just to say, for me personally, this report does not pretend to be like the like super exhaustive snapshot of, because of course the name is very ambitious, and I think it is clear that this report is not giving you 100% kind of overview of all sectors, of all type of professions in the sector. And we also actually not really even want to do that. We want just to highlight what's really burning, what's really important, what's emerging, and what maybe what we don't discuss enough in the sector.
Yeah, definitely. In our days, you cannot exhaust anything now, any field or any subject. Yeah, I would move on to, of course, money, which we always discuss whenever, but also when we are talking about policies. Maybe you can tell us a bit about this Agora EU, because there already began discussion about the next financial mechanism for the European Union. And there were also campaigns from our colleagues in different networks about a percent for culture, and then about the types of programs and sums for them, financing programs. So maybe you can just a bit give us an overview about this type of approach from the European Union concerning cultural funding.
So yeah, the new multi-annual financial framework for which would start after 2027 was proposed by the European Commission in summertime, in which from 52 programs, I think they went down to 16 programs only, meaning that almost all these new funds or schemes are new, at least they have new names, and a lot of merging has happened. So Creative Europe was merged with the Values Program, the so-called CERF, like the abbreviation of it, which funds civil society organizations, equality rights, kind of these fields. Agora EU, so that's both Creative Europe and CERF got their budgets doubled within this new proposed program. I think there are a few interesting elements out there, but there are also some concerns. And the main concern, of course, about the integration of these two programs itself. There was a debate at the European Parliament recently where the European Commission representatives said that we shouldn't really call it a merger, because each strand within the Agora EU program, such as Creative Europe, which is formerly was called Culture Strand, Media Plus, which was previously Media Strand of Creative Europe, and CERF, they are kind of autonomous from each other, which is totally true. They all have their own objectives, which are not dramatically different from the previous, like current programs. Kind of the challenges of different sectors are acknowledged in their proposal for their regulation. And indeed, it all looks like that there is a kind of an understanding of autonomy, like of importance to keep these strengths independent from each other. But with this integration, there are two concerns. One is political. The place of culture is basically becoming more vulnerable, because culture does not have anymore a clear branded program just for itself. Some people would say, why do you bother? The budget is doubled. So it's now kind of also highlighted in the democracy space, because the two programs coming together now are also supposed to actually contribute to the enhancement of European democracy, which is kind of the overall umbrella of Agora EU. But indeed, when a sector, be it health sector or education or anything else, doesn't have anymore its own program, its own specific place within policy framework, which is so competitive and so complex, there is a big risk in the future when politics change, because maybe with the current political structure, there is a goodwill actually to support culture, to promote its role, etc. But things can change, and it would be much easier in the future. And I'm really talking also about long-term future. Maybe the MFF, which would come after Agora EU, it would be much easier to scrap culture or to reduce it dramatically altogether than it would be to get rid of a program such as Creative Europe, which is a separate program within the budget. We've seen this happening at the national level in different countries. We also seen when culture is merged with a lot of different things within the same ministry, and when culture is not anymore featured in the name of the ministry, this is quite tricky for cultural sector. It is politically quite vulnerable. But I would not also be super crazy discussing branding problems. They're also very clear economic problem for the cultural sector within merger, not only for the cultural sector. There is this new flexibility methodology that the Commission proposed. So it was recognized that the previous or the current, let's say, MFF is quite rigid when there is crisis, and we have seen at least 2 crises within this last 5 years, COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. So when there's the kind of things happen, obviously it's logical that it would be good to have a bit of more flexible budget when some crisis money could be used to fill some gaps in an urgent manner. So what will actually be possible now, except for some other flexibility mechanisms, which I will not go into, is to move finances within strands within the program. So if Creative Europe would be a separate program, it would be possible to move money between media, cross-sectoral trend, and between culture. That's the 3 strands we have now. Now, Creative Europe or culture is not anymore a specific program, it's a strand. So you can imagine in the future, whatever crisis may happen, this money can flow anywhere and it could be decided on an annual basis. Of course, I don't think that culture will be completely disappearing. It cannot happen because it isn't the objectives of the regulation. But the constant renegotiation of how the money are divided and allocated will happen. It doesn't create, let's say, stability. And it also creates competition between these different strands. Now we have there civil society, media, media like journalism, some democracy NGOs, we have artists, we have journalists, we have film producers. So there are so many beneficiaries within this pool. Do we want them to compete? Yes, the budget also grows. I think there will be a lot of interest for different sectoral interests to be promoted. So this is not a good start. And I think what we need is to actually at least to create a clear earmarking, the percentages for each strand within the regulation. In the current Creative Europe regulation, we have these percentages in the text of the regulation. In the proposed Agora EU regulation, there are no percentages. And I think, sorry to go that technical, that's what could help. And I also think that these other, let's say, clauses which are put within Agora EU, such as democracy, like the Agora EU is supposed to help Democracy Shield, the new strategy that Commission President proposed. All the democratic disinformation space is extremely important for the EU right now. It was a big, big thing in the State of Union speech of the Commission President. Culture, on the other hand, is not that important. I don't want to say that this democratic enhancement is not needed. It is an important strategy. It is one of the 3 priorities of the EU right now. But is it safe enough for culture to neighbor with such a big cause within the same program, while there is no clarity about, or let's say no guarantee of the substantial money pot that will will be secured. So I think these two political and financial concerns are still there. And of course, MFF was just proposed. There are a lot of players which don't like this proposal. Member states, some of them, some NGOs, farmers, European Parliament. So this will be a very tough process of negotiating it. And we might see still a reduction of this Agora EU pot very much. So it's just a beginning, and a very challenging one, I think, even if I think we have to recognize that this is a very good step, that the budget was doubled, at least in the proposal.
Very good points. Thank you so much. I will just pinpoint in the end. On one hand, maybe some of our colleague listeners know that within the period of time of pandemic, it was these initiatives of cultural deals. So actually, this cultural deal began to grow as an umbrella to put all the things that we wanted. And then we can find association with culture. We can find the push from to have our own sustainable development goal, our the 18 one, which was pushed just weeks ago for Mondia Cult. And then there is this connection, apropos pandemic, with culture and health, and you can find association between culture and security, and then there the Finland also is a good example. And then you reach this neighborhood between culture and democracy. You talked about instrumentalization, but actually culture is instrumentalized, but in warfare manner. So actually, as you very well known about the narrative wars that happens on social media. So actually, where to stand? I mean, do we want culture like like a normal insertion in every or almost every part of the society, which I think is normal, or do we want culture to be a separate domain, a very specific a field with its own issues or problems or fantastic developments? So actually, is maybe this discussion is also found in what you mentioned about this Agora EU discussion. So actually, maybe it's a discussion of principles and values more than money first for this Agora. Maybe I can have your input on this.
Of course, I think we want both. Of course, we want to see culture recognized for all those other fields which are so vital, like health, security, economics, education, international relations, social cohesion, social integration, and I can go on and on and on. And culture is important, whether somebody wants it or not, whether there is a policymaker which doesn't want to include culture somewhere, or whether this goal exists or not. Of course, culture remains to be important. And at the same time, of course, we also need culture to be a specific field in itself. So I think this debate is as old as cultural policy as such. And what I think is important here for us, the cultural sector, maybe to think about is there are all these arguments. They have been already developed. They are quite strong, and at least I think there is quite some data already collected, and it needs to be collected again and again about contribution of culture to economics, about contribution of culture to well-being. Now it's a big topic indeed, on health as well, about culture and society, etc., etc. So all these arguments already exist. We have a toolbox to be used. And here I will not be very innovative, but I think what we really need to do is to make sure that we understand why we use certain arguments and what usage of these arguments actually then implies and triggers. So if we want now to run around with culture and health So, do we say that culture is just fundamental for any healthy society? And this means that culture needs to be a public good that is accessible to everyone. Culture should penetrate everyone's life in some way or another. Creativity, art, I don't know, heritage, etc. So, culture needs to be a strong, flourishing part of the country's or society's life. And then you will see that societies will be healthy. That's one approach. Another approach is to say, hey, culture is extremely important for people's health. So let's now put an artist in every hospital. Let's now make sure that every artistic project that we fund actually tries to measure its impact for health. Let's create a festival which is all about mental well-being. And so that's another approach. That's where you come to instrumentalization. It's like when we think about education, um, it would not cross anyone's mind to start with saying that we need a school in that village because it will create, I don't know, 8 billion, I don't know, of revenues. So I think it's clear that first of all, we create a school in that village because we want people to stay here. We want young people to be here. We want community life, and we want people to actually live like a decent lives and to get access to education. And what else it will create? Hopefully, and most certainly, it will also create contribution to GDP. It will create some spillover effects for tourism, for, I don't know, decrease of criminality, etc. The same for hospital. It's like you will not start by saying, oh, we need to build in this neighborhood, we need a hospital because this neighborhood needs, I don't know, it has an economic gap of this and that money. So I think we need to be very mindful about how do we use these arguments. Of course, culture creates all these important ripple effects. And of course, we can use these ripple effects, and we even can cite data that indeed participation in culture, I don't know, boosts people's um, uh, brain activity, or all these more medical terms. But it doesn't mean that now we only have to stimulate that part of cultural sector. It doesn't mean that we now only have to work with these industries which actually create this GDP surplus, etc. So cultural sector is extremely diverse. It's important to remember about this ecosystemic dynamics. So if we give up on theater or performing arts, it will ultimately hit back the literature sector. If we don't support design or, I don't know, fashion or visual artists, it will ultimately hit theater, which needs these elements as well. The same for film. They are all relying on each other, but they are not equally contributing to day-to-day health benefits or, let's say, GDP. So for me, it would be, let's approach culture as indeed a public good that needs to be accessible, that needs to be diverse, like different expressions should be there. Let's invest in actual, citing Justin O'Connor, cultural infrastructure, which is not only about buildings, but also about skills, capacities, networks, etc. And let's believe and let's measure maybe their impacts, but in a more, let's say, in a more kind of distant way. Like, let's give it a time as well. And there's other impacts of culture which can only be measured through centuries, like what, for example, Europe is as a cultural continent. I think this can only be measured through centuries. What does it mean for a country or for a nation or for a region to have a cultural identity which is recognizable on a bigger scale? Or how do we understand history through culture? So these kind of things can only be measured through a very long term. And just more practically, my 2 cents about mainstreaming culture in different other policies or other funds, like, for example, at the EU level. I think we should, first of all, really sort out our own program. We should really be sure that we have our program, which is guaranteed, which is big, budget enough, which actually guarantees us artistic freedom. So, which doesn't um, squeeze people into boxes and different other policy priorities. So we need our strong political place in this new framework. And then, of course, as a secondary, for me, it's definitely secondary priority is trying to put culture in all other funds. I actually believe that, for example, as a skills agenda comes up in different areas or education, of course, it's only comes up in these other agendas because education policy as such exists. Like there is a recognition that education is a public good. So, and also, while it is extremely important to have culture in many other fields, such as Horizon Europe, some other, like now these new programs, I don't remember all their names, all these different funds. But it's also, we also should remember that for the cultural sector on the ground, it is already quite complex to apply for like Creative Europe these days. So we really need to be mindful that these funds are especially should become more accessible for people. And when culture is mainstreamed in other areas, we need to be really mindful for whom will it be. Will an art organization somewhere, I don't know, in a remote area be able to apply for that fund? So how to make them this accessible? I think I'm not trying to say that we don't need to mainstream culture, but we need to be super mindful that this cannot replace a fund, or it should not divert attention from actually taking care of our own cultural program, our own funds, which is clear, which is accessible for artists and art organizations on the ground all across Europe.
Super, thank you so much. It's quite needed for a clear stand. Thank you, Elena. We'll be talking, and time passes. Thank you so much for your input and for your knowledge. We will, as always, put links to some of the things that we discussed to our colleagues to go deeper. Yeah, and hope we meet soon. Thank you.
Thank you.